Just because they're instructed to only pay attention to sworn testimony doesn't mean crap. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer, everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only, and just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. Okay, we're going to continue going through the documents. This next one that we're going to go over is the defendant's response to the state's motion in limine regarding neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence. This is part of the information where we learned about Kohberger's autism diagnosis. Now, again, those of you that have been here for a while, and a lot of people that have been following this case since he was arrested especially, really sort of figured that Bryan Kohberger was on the spectrum in some way, shape, or form. We kind of always thought of Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory whenever we were sort of hearing about his OCDs, his up all nights, his things like that, especially when it came to how he was a teacher and he's sort of like expected certain things out of his students that he was grading. Now, they tried to make that sort of like a sexist type issue, but it was really, that's how he was with everyone. Like, for instance, there was this one story that we heard where this girl apparently went up and asked Cobberger a question about the assignment, and he was really just like point blank, well, did you read the instructions or did you read the directions? Basically implying that you're asking me a question that the answer is there if you would have done the work correctly. If you would have taken your time, read the instructions, read the directions, you wouldn't be asking me this question right now. Honestly, that's how I answer people. So I find no wrong at all in his response. We're going to get into a lot more detail about his behaviors, his diagnoses, and now they're apparently even claiming there's some sort of disorder that he has that would almost make it physically impossible for him to have been able to do these ninja style type movements in this time frame that they're claiming all of this happened, which is extremely interesting because from the beginning, most of us have been claiming that whoever did this, for it to have been one person, they would have to be a trained professional to leave no trace, for all of the assumptions for where the person left to literally be assumptions based on other things, for where the person left in the car to all be based on assumptions and not anything physical. We even have the verbiage that we're getting about the cameras claiming things about the car like, well, there's no camera footage of the car this way, so it had to be this way, even though there's no camera footage over here either. It just has to be because there's none over this way. And that's not an exaggeration. We went over the document where it literally states, because there's no camera footage this way, it's assumed the car went this way. Everything about this case is assumption. I don't see any physical data, nothing concrete, nothing once again, and so far, points to the man sitting at the defendant table, besides DNA that so far can be easily explained away. Again, the man is not Stretch Armstrong. If he was not in the vicinity of King Road at the time of the crime, it is physically impossible for him to be the one who did this. For right now, let's dig into the document. Now, again, this is the defendant's response to the state's motion in limine regarding neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence. We're going to skip right to where the information starts. The minute that jury selection begins, jurors will begin to study and analyze Mr. Kohberger's physical presence. They will watch his every move and pass judgment on him every minute of the jury trial simply based on how he looks and reacts to the presentation of certain evidence and comments about him. Mr. Kohberger must be able to present testimony to the jury that he has certain physical disorders. It will assist the trier of fact to know his physical presentation, including non-verbal reactions in the courtroom, is explained by his physical condition. To exclude this evidence will result in unfair bias that could cause a wrongful conviction. This objection is supported by the declaration of Dr. Jeffrey Lewine, I'm guessing that's how it's pronounced, an expert in neuroscience and neuroimaging. They actually mapped Kohberger's brain. Mr. Cobberger in no way suggests that expert testimony related to his autism spectrum disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and developmental coordination disorder, that one I had to look up, and we will go over it whenever we get down to that portion of the document here in just a minute. He is in no way stating that these are being presented for the purpose of showing that he does not know right from wrong. He has at all times and continues to assert his actual innocence in this case. The state correctly noted in its motion, Mr. Kohberger's disclosure states that Dr. Orr's testimony and Dr. Ryan's testimony is not intended to be a mental element defense pursuant to Idaho Code 18201. So everyone that's claiming that all of this is being presented because it's trying to say that, oh, this is an excuse for him actually being the person who committed the crime, this very much black and white text is proving that they've all been wrong the whole time and that we were right. The people with brains that pay attention. But rather, this testimony about state of mind, as well as factual defense testimony to anticipated testimony elicited by the state. Now, the next two paragraphs go on about how expert testimony is needed, and this basically sums it up in this one sentence. The function of the expert is to provide testimony that is beyond the common sense, experience, and education of the average juror, to sort of teach the jurors exactly what it is they're going to be listening to. And Hippler very much stated that when it comes to the experts here that are going to be having to give a presentation and sort of do a quick teaching lesson on the subject at hand, that Hippler wants to see the actual presentation. He doesn't want to just get footnotes saying what the expert's going to be talking about. Whatever is going to be presented, whatever is going to be used as a tool to teach the jurors about what's going on, be it a presentation, a report, a document, a physical thing that they're going to get up and show. He wants it to physically be presented to him whenever he's looking over the expert testimony information being submitted by both sides. So he wants all of the specifics and all of the details, and he very much expects, I guess, like a show to be put on. And I mean, honestly, that's probably what's going to end up happening here. This thing is going to go on for weeks. And this is why. In this case, it is not the normal experience and qualifications of lay jurors to understand autism, OCD, or developmental coordination disorder. So expert testimony is necessary for people to understand exactly what those things mean and how those things actually hinder or stop Bryan Kohberger from being able to do certain things. And honestly, when it comes to this developmental coordination disorder, it really sounds more like the guy we heard about that got fired from being a fish fillet guy because he couldn't actually coordinate the knife and fillet a fish correctly back whenever he was younger, and not the guy that they're telling us magically ninja through a house in like 10-ish minutes or less and took 4 people out with a manual blade and left not a trace behind practically. I mean, we can literally explain that DNA away a million times over, but how do you explain their timeline with how nothing else in the case points to him? Nothing that the roommates have said, nothing in the 911 call, nothing in the self-authenticating records when it comes to financial records, from it being shopping or banking records or credit card information or crypto information or location information, literally anything. Nothing at this point has created a photo. Nothing at this point has created a story. Nothing at this point has created anything that points to Bryan Kohberger. Literally nothing at all. And now the physical aspect of him really, again, makes it sound like it would be physically impossible for him to handle doing such a crazy, literally magically ninja feat. There's just no way. Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. The anticipated testimony of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan is relevant to explain that Mr. Kohberger's ASD diagnosis is a physical condition and how it presents in his demeanor. Mr. Kohberger has met the criteria for this diagnosis since childhood, and that it's not a convenient diagnosis given his current legal situation and jeopardy. The anticipated testimony of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan is relevant to explaining how the behaviors and mannerisms presented by Mr. Kohberger are consistent with an individual having ASD. In addition of the opinions of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan, the declaration of Dr. Lewine explains that neuroimaging of Mr. Kohberger's brain supports the ASD diagnosis, and there is the very specific information attached to this. ASD is a neurological disorder that is physical. While most people ordinarily think of ASD as a mental health condition, it is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. Now, again, for the footnotes, for the links, there will be a link for this document down in the description box. It's public access. Literally anyone can view it. If you're out of the country and need a VPN in order to view it, just make sure that you have it on before you actually go to the public interest website. If you guys need a VPN, I have links for both Nord and Aura, both highly recommend. As a neurological disorder, ASD is associated with structural and functional, i.e., physical, defects of the tissues of the brain that can't be seen when you look at a person, but it can be observed with proper microscopic examination and in some individuals through the use of quantitative analysis of magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, such as the case with Mr. Kohberger. Research on large groups of persons with ASD has indicated the presence of structural differences in the brains of these groups versus those of individuals with typical neurobiological development, which also supports the conclusion of the NIMH and others that ASD is a neurological disorder, as reported in Dr. Lewine's attached declaration, shows findings of structural differences in the physical makeup of his brain in areas commonly associated with the control and expression of behaviors commonly seen in ASD and listed below as taken from the NIMH website. As a physical condition, ASD may not be as noticeable as some physical conditions, like a missing arm. If Mr. Kohberger had the physical disability of missing an arm, the jury would not require explanation about how such a physical condition may impact the case. ASD is visible in some ways that will be apparent to a jury, but requires explanation. Without explanation, the way that the public perceives the behaviors and mannerisms of someone with ASD is not always favorable and may be prejudicial. While Mr. Kohberger's presentation is highly consistent with ASD, without explanation, others may interpret and misidentify Mr. Kohberger's behaviors and cast them in a more sinister light. For example, he does not show emotion on his face. He has a flat effect. He sits very still and holds his hands in the same position. We've seen this. We've definitely seen this. He has a piercing stare. He does not show expected reactions. Facial expressions do not reflect what he is feeling. He is stiff in body posture. He has prosody in speech, uses repetitive phrases and large words, and has developmental dexterity problems. This portion right here is extremely important. Many of his behavioral characteristics are known to be commonly associated with the presence of ASD and are clearly relevant to the interpretation of his behavior in the courtroom by the jury, and may also be relevant evidence regarding the rebuttal of evidence as to the commission of the crime itself. Now, this is a list of common behaviors according to this NIMH website. I've highlighted a few of them. When it comes to social communication and social interaction behaviors, this may include making little or inconsistent eye contact, appearing not to look at or listen to people who are talking, infrequently sharing interest, emotion, or enjoyment of objects or activities, including infrequently pointing at or showing things to others, not responding or being slow to respond to one's name or other verbal bids for attention, having difficulties with the back and forth of conversation, often talking at length about a subject of interest without considering social cues or conversational give and take, displaying facial expressions, movements, and gestures that do not match what is being said, having an unusual tone of voice that may sound flat, lacking emotion or tonal variation, having trouble understanding another person's point of view, or being able to predict or understand other people's actions, difficulties adjusting behavior to different social situations, difficulties sharing in imaginative play or in making friends. Remember what we did here, that whenever Cobberger and his dad drove down to WSU for him to move into his apartment, his dad was trying to talk to the neighbors and trying to get, Cobberger to make friends with people around him. So this must obviously have been an issue for a while, but we also do know that back in the day, Cobberger had a big friend group. It just wasn't really a friend group that was going anywhere. There was a lot of usage of things in that friend group. Now, again, the fact that Cobberger apparently went to something like H so young has never left my mind. That's always going to be in the back of my head, especially given all of his diagnoses. But then again, maybe it can also explain it for him being an easy target, vulnerable, easy to manipulate into trying something he maybe shouldn't. I mean, not maybe, you definitely shouldn't be, but more susceptible to maybe like peer pressure as a teenager when it comes to that sort of usage, because that's extreme. That is so freaking extreme. But then we also know that he was overweight, lost a bunch of weight, got on a career path, really started doing really well. So it's not like he was allowing any of these diagnoses to really hold him back at all. He seems to be very intelligent. I mean, he's getting recommendations that a lot of these students just wish they were even considered for, much less actually getting the actual position. Again, Sheldon Cooper. Restrictive repetitive behaviors may include repeating certain behaviors or having unusual behaviors, such as repeating words or phrases, a behavior called echolalia. I've heard that before. Having a lasting intense interest in specific topics, such as numbers, details, or facts, showing overly focused interest, such as with moving objects or with parts of objects, becoming upset by slight changes in a routine, and having difficulty with transition. Now, the argument that we heard that he was getting into with his professor was probably because of this situation right here, becoming upset by slight changes in a routine and having difficulty with transitions. We've already been told in documentation that all of the things that we were hearing were actually happening were contributed to his autism. Now, these same documents also claim that there was found to be no wrongdoings on Kohberger's part once WSU completed their investigation into these issues. So there's nothing creepy or wrong about him. If he's got autism and he has difficult transitioning, that was a reason why he would have been maybe arguing with his professor. But as we already know, there's no proof that he was fired prior to him being arrested. He was found to have done nothing wrong. We have him having to be trespassed off the property after his arrest, which if you're fired beforehand, you don't need to be trespassed for something that happened after you lost that job. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. He was also still on the WSU directory whenever his name went public, and people were able to go and get that information, along with the fact that in the PCA, the majority of the information when it comes to Bryan's employment status, or shall I say student employment status, came from the Pullman Police Department. If you go back and read the PCA, you will actually see this, because they are the ones who actually give the information over about what the role was for Bryan being there in the first place, because the classes that Bryan was taking also do things with the Pullman Police Department. It's part of the program. All of this information regarding his TA position, his student status, his role in all of these things were very much valid and actually still a thing at the time that he was arrested. Remember, he was even grading papers once he got back to Pennsylvania. It goes on to say that autistic people often have sensory differences, such as being more sensitive or less sensitive than other people to sensory input, such as light, sound, clothing, or temperature. People with ASD also may experience sleep problems and irritability. Based upon reasoned analysis of discovery provided by the state to date, Mr. Kohberger's behaviors that are attributable to his ASD, and on this list of common behaviors of persons with ASD as provided by the NIMH, along with other behaviors attributable to his neurological condition, must be presented to the jury to confront and rebut certain evidence to be proffered by the state. Obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD can be an independent diagnosis, but is also a set of symptomatic behaviors that are often comorbid in ASD, as with Mr. Kohberger's ASD. Notable, for example, on the above NIMH list of behavioral issues commonly associated with ASD, Mr. Kohberger has sleep difficulties and subsequently developed a habit of night driving or running to decompress, such behaviors being present most of his life. And such behaviors we've technically sort of seen proof of. We do have an instance of him getting locked inside of a park behind a gate and having to have someone come out and help him get out. We also know that the neighbors claim that they hear him up vacuuming late at night. A lot of people have OCD. A lot of people have insomnia. A lot of people are up really late at night. I'm one of them. A lot of people go on these night drives. Millions of people across the planet go on night drives to try to unwind at the end of the day. It's not an uncommon situation at all. On top of that, him being out in the wilderness and hiking is also something that we know that he does, because someone at the pool party that he was invited to by one of the neighbors saw him on a hiking trail a few weeks after the pool party, and they had an interaction. And jogging and running is also something that he has not only done at WSU with one of the neighbors, or maybe even a few of the neighbors in his apartment complex, but there's also people that he used to run with and jog with back in his old school, back in his hometown. People have come out and talked about going on runs with him. He also engages in frequent compulsive hand washing, wears gloves to avoid germs, has a fear of things getting in his eyes, changes his shower curtain frequently to avoid exposure to mold, and avoids anything he views as contaminating. Now, two things, because I'm sure that some of you are going to see this right here. I have this name right here because originally I was thinking that the Mr. and Mrs. Barnhart that have been attached as experts weren't really experts, and it was really people that knew him and maybe could attest to his pattern of behavior and things like that. But I think I found who these people are based on looking at a couple of other websites. So I'm going to put something together really quickly here just to clarify why it says Barnhart right there. But again, just so you guys know, I think I found who they are. They are experts. I'll get that video out here soon. But when it comes to the shower curtain situation, one of my things about the fact that whenever they went into his apartment and found no shower curtain was that he was going to be gone for a few weeks. So there would be no reason to leave a shower curtain that had, moisture doing its thing on it in a stagnant apartment for a few weeks over Christmas break. It'd be easier and healthier for your lungs and what you're breathing in and what's actually accumulating when it comes to the fact that everything is a freaking petri dish, okay? It made sense to me that he just got rid of it because it's just a couple bucks to replace. And on top of that, the 1031 selfie that he took, the shower curtain is in that photo. And a lot of people have been cropping it out or acting like it's not there, acting like it's the wall. No, it's not. It's wavy. And there's an indentation towards the top where you can see that the material ends and you can see the first hanger. And like some people have said, oh, you can't see any of the hangers. Hello, if the shower curtain is pushed all the way off to one side, the little loops and hanger thingies go with it. What are you talking about? It's really like people forget reality when it comes to looking at pictures, when it comes to things that have some sort of like sinister stigma over it. The photo looks normal. Like I said this on Twitter earlier to somebody that I follow that thinks this is a creepy photo, that if they were just scrolling through their Twitter and saw this photo randomly posted because for some reason it was just on their feed, they wouldn't think anything about it. They would just go on about their day. But because of what's going on in the time frame here, it has this like cloud over it. But the shower curtain's there. And for it to have been gone, again, because he was going to be gone for a few weeks and that was going to be a stagnant apartment, it made sense to me that it was gone. And it also made sense to me that all of the trash cans were emptied. I'm sorry, but who actually goes on vacation and leaves your trash in your house? That's disgusting. Wouldn't you empty all of the trash in your house so that you come home to a house that smells clean instead of a house that smells like a sewer or a dumpster or a landfill? Like, why would you want your trash to be sitting in your house for weeks and weeks and weeks? That's gross. So when you look at the behaviors themselves, for the fact that it was a Christmas holiday, he was going to be home at his parents' house for a few weeks, and his behavior is here, it sounds completely freaking normal. It goes on to say, if the state elicits testimony at trial related to these types of facts that are used to build circumstantially the elements of the crime or show Mr. Cobberger's actions as reflecting his state of mind or other elements of the crime, he will refute that evidence through expert testimony as behaviors related to his OCD and his ASD, meaning wearing gloves when he goes to a grocery store where things are gross and nasty because everybody touches everything. And again, guys, this was still whenever a lot of places were under pandemic law. A lot of places were still needing you to like wear a mask. Gloves were still a thing, especially for people that had immune issues or people that were still worried about the vid, okay? None of these behaviors, whether it be for whatever he's diagnosed with or for the timing of the time, is odd here. By way of specific example, the state has continued to claim that Mr. Cobberger was wearing gloves on the night of his arrest and placing trash in baggies. That has been a big thing they've been claiming. The state asserts that this demonstrates that he had consciousness of guilt and was trying either to hide his DNA or engage in the cleaning of his car. Now, remember, the documents that we got said that whenever they were viewing him in his parents' house through a scope, mounted on a weapon, okay, that he was in a black hoodie and that he was in his kitchen and then he went towards like the sliding door and then at some point he was in the garage and they said that they saw like flashing lights or something like that, which is interesting, and that was like indicative of a car being locked or whatever, and that he was in there for a handful of minutes. Over 5 minutes, but less than 10, I think, from I remember. It was enough probably for them to think that he was doing whatever. But then whenever they actually engaged and actually went into the house, he was no longer like in the kitchen and walking around. He was actually in his bedroom. And what you're going to find out here is that he was up cleaning, which is something that he normally does because of his OCD and inability to sleep at night. This is highly prejudicial and misleading. Mr. Cobberger frequently wears gloves to avoid germs on surfaces. He was not cleaning his car on the night of his arrest. He was awake at night, as is typical for him, and he was cleaning his bathroom. While testimony related to these topics may not be relevant until the state opens the door by eliciting testimony on these issues, once it does, Mr. Cobberger must be allowed to provide expert testimony refuting the state's witnesses. Such relevant evidence can assist the trier of fact in evaluating circumstantial evidence the state may put forward, and since all such testimony would be subject to vigorous cross-examination, it would clarify and not confuse the jurors. Now, this is the interesting one, developmental coordination disorder. Now, I'm just going to show you really quick what it showed me whenever I Googled it, and it says this. Developmental coordination disorder, or DCD, also known as dyspraxia, is a neurodevelopmental condition. It is characterized by impaired coordination of physical movements due to inaccurate transmission of brain messages to the body. Children and teenagers with DCD may find it hard to coordinate their bodies for everyday tasks. While there is no cure, occupational therapy can help children learn ways to overcome these challenges. And it's only talking about children because it's like a developmental thing, but it does continue on in adults. And it's actually really, really interesting because it basically goes to a comment that I got the other day. Now, I don't know if this is an actual validated comment. This is me just repeating something that was posted and piqued my interest in a comment on my video. Someone posted that a family member of Bryan Kohberger, and again, this is nothing verified, it just matches sort of what we're getting here, so I'm bringing it up for just in case purposes, okay? Someone commented that one of Bryan Kohberger's family members posted a comment on a social media platform, probably one of the Facebook groups, about how a lot of people that were out here talking mess basically about the thumbs up photo was going to end up really regretting it whenever they realized that the thumbs up photo was for his mom to show that he was able to actually get the top button buttoned on his shirt because he has dexterity issues and being able to button buttons has always been an issue for him, and he wanted to show her that he buttoned all his buttons. When it comes to that comment, and now knowing that he has some sort of dexterity issue, it also kind of goes back to the post that we have where he talks about his visual snow that a lot of people are kind of on the fence about on if they're his or not. Again, based on the last active date being so long ago and nowhere near the time of the crime, in order for it to be mimicking Bryan Kohberger, it would show that the last active date was after the time of the crime, after the time of his arrest being announced, in my opinion, and it's not. It's years and years ago. So again, this is tracking. This is definitely tracking to what we've sort of already seen in this case when it comes to any sort of issues he might actually have. Mr. Cobberger suffers from deficits in fine motor dexterity and visual motor function. Now, again, I forget I wanted to mention this. Whenever I was going through this, I said I have to remember to mention this. Again, this is a guy who, younger, was hired on at like a fishery where they fillet fish to sell to the public and didn't get to keep his job because he never got the skill down.
Our records show he was in our employment for 4 months, but he probably only worked about 20 days for us. And as far as filleting fish, he never got proficient at it. We bring kids in and train them, and until they're good enough, we don't allow them to do customers' fish. So he probably only practiced filleting maybe 8 to 10 days out of those 20 days. This probably was his first job because he was only, I think, 16 at the time. After he was here several times, it became obvious to me that this job just wasn't for him. He wasn't able to make eye contact with customers and be friendly to them. And he never got good enough for us to allow him to fillet customers' fish. So I talked to his direct supervisor, who already was on board and saw the situation. He talked to Bryan, and really mutually they decided that that job was not for him.
That's a dexterity issue. He didn't know how to handle a blade. He couldn't hold a knife and fillet a fish correctly. But we're supposed to believe that he did all of these things in such a small amount of time, as perfectly executed as it was, with all of the insanity surrounding the entire thing. I'm sorry, but no, it doesn't math. Clearly, these are physical issues. He has experienced these physical impairments all of his life. The state has disclosed evidence that law enforcement will testify that they did test runs at 1122 King Road and that it is possible to commit 4 homicides in a time frame of only minutes, including walking to and from a car, removing clothing that would be covered in blood. Now, there's a big space in between that word in the period of the sentence, so I'm wondering if there was something else in there. Now, I did see people talking about this on Twitter about how they did a test. Are they accounting for the people like fighting back, possibly having to chase the victims down, or accounting for the fact that there were other people home and that there was like nothing that actually pointed out to where the person came in or out the house, that all of it's assumption based off of what the roommates were claiming? How can they actually do a true test run of anything without knowing exactly what happened? We don't know how long the fight to put Ethan down actually lasted, how long the fight to put Xana down actually lasted. We don't really know any of those things. And if they can come out now and claim that they do, but still refuse to give us the actual time of death, I'm just going to say that I don't believe it. And they're only doing the whole removing and clothing thing, not because of any evidence that's actually out there, because we've gone through the documents, we've gone through everything, including the cases that are just being referenced when it comes to somebody claiming that some clothes were stuffed in a bag. That was not the case. They were referencing a case that goes by Davis, and they mention it quite a bit whenever they discuss this in court. But they're mentioning this because there was nothing found in his car. Nothing when it comes to hair fiber, DNA, skin cells, nothing of the victims whatsoever was found in his vehicle or his apartment or anywhere else. Additionally, the state has disclosed a forensic pathologist who will testify regarding manner of death, injuries, and specific wounds of the deceased. Mr. Kohberger has disclosed a forensic pathologist who has some differing opinions, including injury and specific wounds on the deceased. There should be a difference of opinion because we need to remember they have yet to ever come out and tell us that the knife that fits that sheath that was found matches the wounds of the victims. They've never ever said that to us, literally ever. On top of that, when it comes to the description of the wounds, we're getting everything from something that was a sharp edged to how they look like gouges. Okay, you don't get gouges from something that's like a sharp edged skinny blade. You don't. And then we also have to keep in the back of your mind the fact that Ethan Chapin's golf clubs were held back for evidence, for investigation, and not with the state, with the defense team. Golf clubs can sure make something like a gouge, don't you think? Not only are we getting differences in the description of the wounds when it comes to the wounds themselves, but also in a way that the victims themselves were actually attacked. We're getting differences when it comes to both official sources and things that are coming from the family. That all very much matters. It will be relevant for the jury to know that Mr. Kohberger has a developmental coordination disorder that impacts his fine motor dexterity and visual motor function. Such speed and coordination are not possible for him. So, what I'm getting from this is that there is someone who is a forensic pathologist that's going to come in and basically claim that the way that everyone was taken, the order of death, the manner of death, the way that certain wounds are, it would be physically impossible for Bryan Kohberger to be able to move and coordinate his movements with that kind of stealth. Now, I know that people are going to come out and they're going to argue about the 6-minute mile or whatever that he apparently ran on Strava, whatever. And I will admit that a 6-minute mile is pretty fast whenever you look at the average charts for his age group, especially. But somebody being able to run quickly doesn't mean that they have upper body strength in order to do all the things or have the ability to actually like coordinate and move the way that attacks have to be coordinated with several body parts in the same order. Jogging is just jogging, running is just running. That's literally just you going in a straight line, putting one foot in front of another. It's not going through an obstacle course and having to do multiple things at once. There's a huge difference there. People hopefully can understand that. Conclusion. Mr. Kohberger has a right to confront the witnesses and evidence presented by the state in due process under the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution and the Article 1, Section 13 of the Idaho Constitution. This includes presenting evidence to refute the case against him. The court should deny the state's motion in limine to exclude neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence. More specifically, the court should allow Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan to testify. The physical disorder of ASD should be allowed at the outset of trial. Issues related to his OCD symptoms that are an outgrowth of his neurological disorder, aka ASD, and then says to see the NIMH quotes above that we went over previously, and developmental coordination disorder may depend on the evidence the state elicits as the trial proceeds. Now, when it comes down here, this is where we get Dr. Jeffrey David Lewine's basically like his report about what was found whenever they actually did the brain mapping of Bryan Kohberger's brain. We're going to run right past all of his credentials and his background. Of course, the link for this document will be in the description box, and you guys can go and read all that yourselves if you so want to. We're going to start here at number 8 and only read the important pieces. Number 8, I have been asked by defense counsel in the matter of the state versus Bryan C. Kohberger to perform quantitative volumetric analysis of Mr. Kohberger's brain and to comment on the neurobiological nature of his various diagnoses. In formulating my opinions in this matter like this, I routinely rely upon my training and experience, the scientific literature, and client-related data and reports collected directly by myself or other professionals, including radiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, and psychologists. Number 9. It is my understanding that Mr. Kohberger has received several diagnoses from appropriate and qualified doctors. For purposes of this declaration, for this motion, I am addressing only 3, meaning there's more. They're only going to talk about 3. Autism spectrum disorder level 1 without accompanying intellectual or language impairment, again, Sheldon Cooper. Developmental coordination disorder, which is the ability to be able to move around and do things with your limbs in certain ways while doing other things as well, multiple movements at one time, coordination. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, with absent insight. It is also my understanding that the state of Idaho has requested that the court issue an order in limine prohibiting defendant from offering testimony regarding neuropsychological evaluation and psychiatric evaluation of the defendant in the guilt/innocence phase of the trial. The state argument relates to Idaho, which provides that mental condition shall not be a defense in any charge of criminal conduct, except expert evidence on the issues of any state of mind, which is an element of the offense. In considering this, it therefore becomes relevant to distinguish diagnosis and evaluations related to mental and physical conditions. I have therefore been asked to discuss the relevant scientific evidence with respect to ASD, DCD, and OCD. As outlined by Dr. Orr in Exhibit D7B, Mr. Kohberger has multiple diagnostic conditions identified by qualified doctors. In my opinion, these conditions span the range from neurodevelopmental to mental conditions. Herein, I will discuss the subset of 3 conditions: autism, developmental coordination disorder, and OCD, which are predominantly neurobiological rather than mental in etiology and relevant to the guilt/innocence phase of the trial as argued by counsel. References are provided in Exhibit 2. The other conditions may be relevant to a sentencing phase of a trial if this case proceeds that far, and therefore will be discussed in a separate report. So right now, they're literally only talking about things that would prove to be evidence to use against the certain things that he is being accused of, i.e., being able to go in and physically do what they're claiming that he did with the coordination disorder that they are now claiming that he has. Autism spectrum disorder level 1 without accompanying intellectual or language impairment. Mr. Kohberger has a current diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. On one hand, his overall level of intellectual function and his general language skills have been adequate to allow him to complete a master's degree. But neuropsychological evaluation reveals deficits in several subdomains, including motor skills, processing speed, and executive function. Perhaps most importantly, he demonstrates substantive impairments in social cognition that date back to early childhood. As noted by Dr. Orr, he demonstrates abnormalities in nonverbal communication, example, poor integration of verbalizations and eye contact, limited use of descriptive gestures, restricted range of affect in an atypical tone, poor social emotional reciprocity, meaning self-focused conversation, awkward interaction, limited perspective taking, limited sharing of affect and emotions of others, and impaired relationships, meaning superficial and logical descriptions of relationships, poor insight into his roles in a relationship, all consistent with autistic patterns. Whereas most patients with an autism spectrum disorder demonstrate intellectual and language impairments, it is well established that there is a significant minority of patients like Bryan where the dominant dysfunction is selectively seen with respect to social cognition. In part, this likely reflects the neurobiological reality of relatively distinct brain networks for language versus social skills. Whereas there was a brief period of history where autism was thought to be a psychological response to environmental factors, meaning refrigerator parents, for more than half of a century, it has been almost universally recognized as having a strong biological basis. Indeed, although ASD diagnostic criteria are most formally described within the DSMV, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM clearly indicates the ASD to be a neurodevelopmental disorder. Evidence that the ASDs are of a neurodevelopmental and psychological biological origin and not a mental condition caused by external psychological factors or events comes from several sources, including timeline of development, with typical onset prior to 3 years of age, with many parents recognizing signs as early as 6 months of age. Very strong heritability, estimated concordance in identical twins, with some chromosomal abnormalities leading to a very high incidence of comorbid autism. High comorbidity with other clearly neurobiological conditions, including epilepsy. More than 30% of persons with an ASD experience seizures by adolescence, and upwards of 60% show epileptic form activity on EEGs. Strong evidence of brain abnormalities through autopsy, imaging, electrophysiology, and neurochemical assessments. This is where we have something very specific. For Bryan specifically, there is objective evidence of disrupted brain structure in several nodes of the social network. As outlined in detail in Exhibit 3, volumetric analysis of magnetic resonance imaging data for Bryan's brain reveals several brain areas to demonstrate volume within the lowest 10th percentile as compared to all sex and age range, give or take 5 years, match neurotypical control subjects drawn from a normative database of over 10,000 subjects. Of particular relevance is evidence of reduced volume for the left and right fusiform gyri, the left and right orbital frontal area, the left temporal pole, and the right anterior cingulate area, all regions within the brain's social network. The fusiform, especially of the right, is especially important for the recognition and evaluation of the emotional characteristics of faces. The orbital frontal cortex plays a key role in the emotional regulation of behavior. The temporal role plays a crucial role in social and emotional processing, especially with respect to the integration of complex perceptual inputs with visceral emotional responses. The anterior cingulate is critical for social decision making and supporting empathy, pro-social behavior, and processing information about others' motivations. Now we get into the developmental coordination disorder. DCD is a neurodevelopmental condition that can occur with, but which is distinct from, the ASDs. Also known as dyspraxia, DCD is characterized by impairments in the development of motor coordination, including dexterity, limb speed, and gross and fine motor skills. Like the ASDs, dyspraxia has high heritability on the order of 70%, a strong indication of a biological etiology. DCD is associated with structural and functional disruption of motor control and coordination networks with minimal modulation by psychological factors. It is noteworthy that Bryan continues to show evidence of significant motor and coordination issues as revealed through formal testing with Dr. Orr. Obsessive compulsive disorder with absent insight. Bryan reportedly developed compulsive hand-washing behaviors as a young child, a fear of getting things in his eyes, and avoidance of germs. There is substantial evidence that OCD is primarily a neurobiological disorder, although it is not necessarily a neurodevelopmental disorder. Evidence in support for its biological basis include a large study of over 15,000 twin pairs indicates the heritability of OCD to be about 47%. OCD can actually be caused by certain viral infections, including streptococcal infection, which can lead to the autoimmune condition PANDAS. Imaging studies also demonstrates a clear neurobiology for OCD, with disruption to the cortico-striato-thalamocortical loop. Importantly, this loop includes the anterior cingulate and orbital frontal cortices, regions that overlap with the neurobiology of ASDs and which were found to be disrupted on Bryan's MRI. The severity and timing of OCD behaviors is admittedly partly influenced by psychological factors, including stress. Also, the specific nature of each person's obsessions and compulsions probably relate to learned factors rather than core neurobiology. In general, OCD is not considered to be a neurodevelopmental condition per se, but it is biological in nature, and in Bryan's case, manifested early in development. In summary, based on my training, experience, review of the scientific literature, and the available data and reports on Mr. Cobberger, I believe that the conditions discussed above are of a clear neurobiological and physical etiology. Bryan's developmental coordination disorder and autism spectrum disorder are specifically neurodevelopmental conditions with physical origins in his brain structure and function. His OCD also has a predominantly neurobiological basis, although it is modulated by psychological factors. And I believe that the remaining 18-ish pages or so is just his background information. It literally just it goes on for literally ever. Now, I'm sure that most of you guys noticed whenever I changed clothes, when I was recording the rest of that document in that shirt, something went weird with my screen. So instead of it looking normal, it looked like squished and stretched. It was really, really strange. So there was no way that I was just going to leave it like that. I definitely had to re-record it. But it actually works out better. And this video is going to have a lot more information in it than it originally was because I'm planning on doing all of the information. Any and everything regarding his autism spectrum disorder, any of the neuro and psych information, including the newest information that came out today. Right now, at the time of me finishing up this recording, it is April 4th, and we have a new prosecutor that just joined the team, and he's already filed his first motion. So by the end of this video, you will have the most up-to-date information regarding this subject when it comes to this case. So that one was a document that was actually posted back on March the 17th. Now, the next one that I'm going to go through is just going to be a couple of pieces that I highlighted. It's actually part of the motion to strike death penalty regarding the autism spectrum disorder that was filed as one of the responses from the defense team. But again, I'm just trying to get the, I guess, basic understanding about what they're trying to claim when it comes to his behaviors. And we already know again that regardless of the fact that they've already came out and told the court that doing it this way was not a good idea, which I agree with, we're having the death penalty arguments put in front of the court before we've even gotten to a guilty or innocent ruling. So it really causes a little bit of confusion in a lot of people's minds when it comes to the information because they're refusing to either see it for what it is or they're just not understanding that there's a difference here, that the autism stuff is not being presented in the first place because they're trying to use it for anything literally at all. They're only having to even talk about it now because the court's making them do it. The court's making them have information be filed regarding the death penalty. If it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't even be hearing about it. But then again, maybe we would. I don't know. Right now, I'm going to go through a couple of these things that actually show a couple of more instances and examples for how his behaviors have been since he was a child. Mr. Cobberger fits the criteria set forth in Atkins in the following ways: impairment in communication, reasoning, social skills, and understanding the reactions of others. His deficits developed at an early age and continue to the present day. ASD is not something one outgrows. Very early on in his education, he was treated as a child with special needs, evaluated psychologically, and provided with instructional support. He was observed as rocking in the classroom, inattentive, and he had poor fine motor skills. He received reading support, speech therapy, reminders to stay on task, more time for homework, and organizational support. He lacked social emotional reciprocity and had few friends. He did not understand nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction and had an inability to develop, maintain, and understand relationships. He lacks the skills to function in the real world of daily living, self care, socialization, and communication. The next part that I highlighted is down here: lesser culpability. Mr. Kohberger has at all times asserted his innocence. Should he be convicted of this crime, his neurological physical disorder may very well be the reason why jury misjudges him. The public sentiment of prejudice against him and prejudgment of guilt resulted in a change of venue. Media coverage continues to be negative, with an overall continued narrative claiming his guilt. The reality is that he is, in fact, in a category of persons who are less culpable. It is widely recognized that autism does affect culpability, moral reasoning, and the ability to foresee consequences of social interaction and processes. People with ASD face a childhood of victimization by their typically developing peers because they are misunderstood. Inevitably, misunderstanding is going to reprise itself in the courtroom setting to the great disadvantage of the autistic accused facing typically developed jurors. Now, this is talking about how death penalty should be a deterrent for people, but that it's not a deterrent for people that don't quite understand it. Now, again, we know what Bryan's course of education is and how far along he is. So a lot of the stuff in this, when it comes to the defense saying certain things regarding autism and trying to make him look a certain way, I'm not buying that. For anyone to claim, oh, because of his autism, he wasn't aware of the punishment for these types of things. If he ends up being guilty, which again I doubt, that is a I don't give a shit situation for me. Okay, if they're able to magically actually prove, not just pull a Richard Allen, okay, if they're actually able to prove that some magic way, some magic ninja rub a genie make a wish way to become this just super villain guy actually happened here, okay, because what they're literally claiming doesn't make sense to me. I don't care that they did test runs and this, that, and the third, whatever they claimed that they did. They don't know what actually happened in that house. They cannot sit there and even pretend like they actually know what happened in that house. Not when it comes to who fought who, how hard the fight was, how long the fight was. If they have no idea what really happened here. And they're literally going and doing those test runs based off of the assumption that everything basically what worked out perfectly. How do you get that whenever there was nothing to let anyone know that showed up that there was blood present anywhere? There was nothing in between the crime scenes. And I mean, Xana and Ethan's location versus Maddie and Kaylee's location. There was nothing in between to like acknowledge an issue there. There's just way too much. And then on top of that, nothing in his apartment, nothing in his car. There's no connection between him and the victims. There's just no way, in my mind, they're going to be able to make this puzzle actually fit together. But if they do, and I've already made this very clear, none of this shit means shit to me. If he ends up being the guy, then the DP is what he deserves. But that's not what I'm seeing so far. It does state, though, to the contrary, autism is often conceptualized as an executive functioning disorder. Part of executive functioning is the ability to foresee consequences and adjusting behavior to optimize one's course of action to obtain beneficial and avoid negative consequences. Mr. Cobberger suffers from executive function deficiencies such as disorganization and inability to plan ahead. And again, I can maybe get that to a point because there's plenty of people that are hella smart that have really like no common sense. Like I said, that he can't be stupid and smart at the same time, and I still mean that. Like they can't expect us to believe that he did all of this advanced work and wants to do all of these things and is reaching for his PhD and had high recommendations, but also turned off his phone after he left his apartment, proving that he left his apartment to begin with, but also was seen on every little freaking camera from here to Timbuktu, even though he should have like been casing the place over 23 times and should have known better. Like, I'm sorry, but their story just literally makes no sense. You can't have somebody that wants to join the police department or help the police department handle cloud-based forensics, and then he literally does everything wrong in way of what cloud-based forensics would help find. In what reality does that even make any logical sense? But if he is guilty, to sit there and say, oh, he wasn't aware of the punishment for this kind of thing, knowing everything surrounding his life, yeah, I'm sorry. You should have like found a better argument for that one. It goes on to say, impairment of intellectually disabled. Mr. Kohberger does have a diminished ability to understand and process information, to learn from experience, to engage in logical reasoning, or to control impulses. As explained in the expert reports, he has poor working memory, engages in repetitive behaviors, and poor impulse control. His neurological divergence is supported in neuroimaging. Mr. Kohberger's ASD makes a fair and just trial a challenge. The state argues news coverage is not informative on this topic. It's really not. They literally make him look like a villain with no actual proof of anything. And it's insane to me because the mainstream media people, they're not only getting like other information, and I know people that also get other information, and the other information that those people are getting matches the information that we're getting from the documents. But anything that mainstream media comes out and talks about that they claim to be getting from sources doesn't match what I know is actually coming from sources, and what I know that other people out there know is actually coming from sources too. Like the stuff that we hear makes more sense to what we're really seeing here, like in the documents. So it's just wild to me that mainstream is just allowed to just continue lying. Like the news stations were literally created just to create lies. No one can ever tell me otherwise. Public sentiment is that Mr. Kohberger's physical presentation makes him look guilty through no fault of his own. And I think Banfeld even made a statement that, like, if he isn't the guy, then that selfie is just really unfortunate or some crap like that. And I'm like, lady, she's just so rude. His flat affect, intense gaze, awkward body posture, holding still in the courtroom, inability to react and process what is happening in the courtroom, and inability to show emotion could cause enough juror bias to convict him. But see, I don't believe that either. There's no way Home Dude is sitting there with the kind of brain that we're being told that he has and not understanding what's happening in that courtroom. I'm not going to fall for that one, though. Without a doubt, his ability to testify in trial and the decision to testify will be nearly impossible for Mr. Kohberger. He has no ability to perceive what it will feel like and whether he should, in fact, testify. His inability to read the room, understand the threat that cross-examination will present, or explain himself in socially acceptable ways without prosody of speech presents insurmountable hurdles for him. The state picked fragments of sentences in the expert reports to support its position that Mr. Kohberger does not present with ASD challenges. In doing so, the state could not be more wrong in comparing Mr. Kohberger's ability to testify in a courtroom to the average person. He suffers from multiple vulnerabilities impacting first, deciding whether or not to testify, and then competently testifying with no ability to eliminate the physical conditions that exist within his body due to his neurodivergence. He fits exactly the Atkins typical poor witness. So they're basically saying that the way that his speech is and the way that his body is going to move around and the way that his face is going to do things and the way that his eyes are going to look at people, it's going to make him look in a way that is giving a negative light to something that's probably just behavior and has nothing to do with him trying to hide anything or lie. Finally, the state argues that Mr. Kohberger is competent, and for that reason, Atkins does not apply. Competence is constantly being assessed, and the reason Dr. Ryan's report refers to the issue is because his ASD impacts his ability to assist counsel and understand the proceedings he faces. And see, I really wonder about that, though, because a lot of people, look, unless we've been being lied to, okay, about how smart this guy really is, and that's a big possibility. Unless we've been being completely freaking lied to by professors, by students that used to work with him and know how his schoolwork was and know how he presented things, unless we've been literally lied to by literally everybody about who he is and what his brain is capable of. I do not believe for 1 second that he is not helping them fight this case for him. He has been studying this kind of stuff for over a decade. There's no way that he's not giving some sort of input. I'm pretty sure that like the majority of people, especially way back in the day, were just expecting that he was helping them figure things out. A lot of people did. He has an inability to assist with mitigation evidence and understand the magnitude of his case. By way of example, when he was arrested in his home with a full SWAT team, doors broken, and parents zip tied, the old parents zip tied, he made small talk with the detective in the back of the car during the ride to the police station. He asked the officer about his education and suggested that they get coffee at a later date. He did not perceive the profoundly serious nature of the moment and exhibited no perception of what was happening. While competency has not been raised in this case, at this time, Mr. Kohberger's team and assisting experts are constantly analyzing this issue. Now, I made a comment in a live where I was asked about this, obviously before I got to the document on the live. I went and found it. I pulled it up. I control F. I typed in coffee. I found it. We discussed it. I have a different interpretation about how this conversation might have been. This could be just me putting me onto somebody else. But to me, he's either like really, truly just a very young, naive minded man and just innocently was like, hey, we should get coffee sometime because he's innocent and there's no harm, no foul. This guy's just doing his job and he had a conversation with him and he has no friends. And it's a socially awkward situation. It's not a situation at all where you would be requesting to go and get coffee for someone. So this behavior really just proves he's completely socially awkward and has no idea what to say and when to say it. Okay, case in point. But I also maybe thought maybe he's being a little bit of a smartass. Maybe he's looking down on this SWAT cop or this cop and being like, you in your freaking vest and me over here with my PhD. I'm just gonna look down on you. What's your education like, broski? You know, I don't know. I don't know the man. I don't know his behaviors. I don't know his sentiments, his mannerisms. I don't know if he's sarcastic. All I know is that people like this, for the majority, they don't really understand sarcasm. They don't understand it, so they don't really know how to use it. So I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to think of, them sitting in the back of the car on that 30-minute ride to the police station, and all he can talk about is the guy sitting next to him's education and if they should go get coffee. I mean, that's wild in itself without all the rest of it. But then again, if he is truly innocent and he knew that he was truly innocent and he said from day one, my phone is going to be proof that I didn't do this. I cannot wait to get back to Idaho and be exonerated. Then maybe he really just thought it was just going to be a story that he could tell his grandkids later on about how he met his best friend. I don't know what was going through that man's mind. I'm just thinking out loud. Now, the rest of this document, because it is 59 pages, but the information about what they wrote ends at page 8. The rest of this is a reference to 2 other cases that they're talking about here. Eric M. Huseth versus the United States. Now, this is a child corn case, so completely different than what we're dealing with here. And another one of United States versus Michael Shore that again has something to do with child corn. And both of these are 3 counts of it. Why are we using these people with autism in a fight in this case for Bryan with autism? I'm pretty sure they probably could have found cases that weren't nasty like this, to prove a point. Now, this one is the state's response to the defendant's motion in limine regarding the neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence. This is their response to the defendant's motion that we read at the beginning of this video. The defendant, in his response to the state's motion in limine, has declared that he apparently has at least 2 separate purposes for the proposed evidence: to explain how the defendant appears before a jury and to rebut what the defendant anticipates to be evidence from the state regarding suspicious, unusual, or other odd physical and social behavior. The defendant has now also included a declaration by Dr. Jeffrey Lewine regarding physical conditions of the defendant. This is the first the state has heard of Dr. Lewine. He was not included in the defendant's guilt phase expert disclosures, nor does he appear to offer anything in rebuttal to proffered expert disclosures from the state. So the defense has now done to the state what the state's been doing to the defense that the defense has been complaining about. Go figure. First, addressing the issue of the defendant's behaviors and appearance as they may be perceived by the jury. The defense offers no authority, statutory or otherwise, to allow him to present evidence purportedly explaining how he may appear or behave in front of a jury. The state is unaware of any such authority. While Idaho Code 18207 does allow for the admission of certain mental condition evidence, not even that statute contemplates the defendant offering evidence of the defendant's behaviors and appearance, much less offering evidence before even the state's case in chief begins. Okay, well, that's why they didn't even want to talk about all of this until after something actually happened. The defense asked for this to be trifurcated instead of bifurcated, and y'all said no. And so the court said no. And now we're having to talk about all this stuff now. They didn't even mention any of this stuff until after they filed the information regarding the death penalty. The state can really only kind of blame themselves, honestly, for this, because I really just don't know what the game plan would have been if DP wasn't on the table. I guess we'll never know. Not only would this type of evidence be completely irrelevant and immaterial to the legal and factual issues in this case, whether the defendant committed 4 murders and burglary, which I'd love to know the burglary thing, because no forced entry has always been interesting, and them not being able to tell which way the perpetrator or the perpetrators went in and out the house. So there's that. It would more likely confuse the issues, mislead the jury, and play to jury's sympathies. These purposes are prohibited by IRE 401, 02, and 03. The state notes that ICJI 202 lists the evidence a jury is allowed to consider, sworn testimony of witnesses, exhibits which have been admitted into evidence, and facts to which the parties have stipulated. The defendant's demeanor and appearance are not included. But are you seriously going to just be like the most moronic moron on the planet? Hello, you know damn well that none of what you just said matters, okay? Who signed this? I want to talk straight to you. Thompson, Xana, you know damn well that what your ass just said is not relevant to real life in reality. Just because they're instructed to only pay attention to sworn testimony doesn't mean crap. What did we hear from the freaking juror that came out to talk to us about the Delphi trial? All they did was talk about how creepy it was that Richard Allen kept looking over at them. Come on now, Xana, you've been doing this long enough. Your ass knew better than to even pretend like that was going to happen. As stated above, the state is unaware of any authority that would allow the defendant to present evidence purportedly explaining how he may appear or behave in front of the jury. There is, however, a body of law regarding prosecutorial misconduct holding that a defendant's courtroom behavior off the witness stand was legally irrelevant to the question of his guilt of the crime charged. And they mention U.S. versus Schuler from 1987. This analysis further supports the conclusion that the defendant's appearance or behavior in front of a jury, at least when he is not testifying, is irrelevant and not evidence. But you cannot unring those bells. And you know damn well that every single one of those people and everybody else watching is going to be watching. So why are you playing? Defendant cites to State versus Samuel from 2019, apparently in support of his request to offer explanations for what he believes the jury will perceive from his physical appearance and behaviors in court. However, State versus Samuel dealt with evidence of mental condition as it related to whether the defendant knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently waived his Miranda rights in speaking with law enforcement. When the defendant opposed the state's request for an independent mental evaluation, the defendant tried to argue that Idaho Code 182074 was limited to mental conditions as they relate to elements of the charged offense. The Idaho Supreme Court held otherwise. What is most important is Samuel does not stand for the proposition that expert or any other testimony regarding how a defendant may appear in front of a jury is admissible. The defendant's appearance and behaviors in front of a jury are not material or relevant. Now, just so that we can clear it up now, right here where it says, when the defendant opposed the state's request for an independent mental evaluation, that does not mean Bryan Kohberger. That means Samuel, whatever, the guy that they're talking about in this case. Okay, let's just keep that part in mind. It appears the defendant, despite his initial declarations that he does not intend to offer this evidence under Idaho Code 18207, is now trying to claim that it is admissible under Idaho Code 18207. See last sentence beginning on page 2 and continuing on page 3 of defendant's response. The defendant cannot have it both ways. Either Idaho Code 18207 applies and the evidence is limited to mental conditions as it relates to a legal or factual issue, or it does not apply, in which event the evidence is irrelevant and not admissible. Okay, so you can argue the ASD and you can argue the OCD, but when it comes to the physical ability of him to be able to take down 4 people, I think that the other one, the DCD, the one that says that he has a coordination issue, that one's probably pretty freaking relevant. That's a medical condition that should definitely be put into evidence as his defense. Right? The defendant asserts that the second purpose of the defendant's proffer of the mental condition evidence is to rebut anticipated state's evidence about how the defendant interacts with others, his personal hygiene habits, and so forth. At the outset, the state currently does not have any intention of offering evidence during the guilt phase of defendant's pattern of odd behaviors, such as social miscues with coworkers, professors, students, and others, compulsive hand washing, etc. So they're not going to be talking about any of that stuff. When it comes to whatever did happen at WSU, which again, after WSU did their own investigation, there was no wrongdoing found to have been done at all by Cobberger, and that is in the documents and goes back to him not being fired prior to his arrest. But they're not going to say anything about him wearing gloves at Albertsons like they put in the PCA to make it look as if he was doing something and trying to hide his fingerprints and DNA from the world. They're not going to mention the fact that he was apparently in his kitchen with gloves on and picking through trash because of his OCDs. They're not going to say none of that. Because to say all of that would mean that the defense has to give you a reason why he's doing those things. And if this is behaviors that he has literally exhibited his entire life, and there is a medical freaking paper trail of evidence to prove so, why can that not be talked about? So for them to say, oh, the state doesn't plan on offering any of this, well, that depends on how the state wants to put things together. The state understands that were it to offer such evidence, in rebuttal, the defendant would likely be entitled to offer evidence to those behaviors stemmed from his OCD and ASD conditions as opposed to some nefarious purpose. That's what I said. Defendant argues he has a developmental coordination disorder. That means it was not possible for him to commit these crimes because he lacked the necessary speed and coordination. But that is not what his neurophysical evaluation found. The expert who conducted the evaluation, Dr. Orr, listed developmental coordination disorder under the title diagnosis for which Bryan met criteria in the past. Dr. Orr clearly explains that motor problems have not impacted his functioning significantly in many years. And then there's a footnote. Curiously, defendant's other mental health expert, Dr. Ryan, includes developmental coordination disorder as a current condition, even though she defers to Dr. Orr's comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation, which found defendant only met the criteria in the past. Dr. Ryan provides no explanation for her differing opinion. In fact, the phrase developmental coordination disorder appears only a single time in Dr. Ryan's report on the list of conditions. Dr. Ryan's discussion of defendant's problems with fine motor skills is limited to his educational history, and all of her references were to observations made more than 2 decades ago. Well, that's interesting. I guess we'll see what the actual current information says, because I did notice whenever I was looking up stuff about the developmental coordination disorder that it mentioned how it was mostly like a childhood thing. Now, it can carry on into adulthood, but a lot of times they grow out of it. So I guess we'll just have to see what the reports say. But as for right now, if they literally have diagnoses going all the way into adulthood for things with an actual paper trail, then one person saying, oh, he had it in the past, and the other one saying, oh, yeah, he's got it now, and the two reports barely having a difference there is not a really big deal. What matters is if they've been able to get his medical record history, and it proves that it's there in the history and has continued throughout. Just because he maybe had it as a child doesn't mean that he grew out of it. He could have. And if it's no longer an issue, okay, that's fine. We can take that off the table completely. But we need the truth about that situation. And this part right here goes into the most recent information coming out about this. So make sure that you watch all the way to the end so that you have the most recently up-to-date info. To the extent defendant currently has any motor impairment, even according to his own expert, it affects only his fine motor dexterity and vulnerabilities in visual motor functions. The examples she used for fine motor dexterity include when he had poor handwriting and trouble tying his shoes in the past. Yeah, that's like childhood stuff. She asserts he continues to have difficulty with manipulation of tools even as an adult, but only per parent report. Per parent report. Well, I mean, that goes kind of back to that button thing on the shirt and who's the picture supposed to be for, just according to the rumor. She also points to her observations during the examination that defendant moved his whole arm and repositioned his upper body slightly to manipulate the items effectively. No reasonable juror could infer from those observations and a diagnosis that applied to defendant in the past that it was not possible for defendant to commit the crimes in which he is charged. Okay, but they're still going to have to, prove that it doesn't have anything in his actual current medical history, because we also have to remember he saw a doctor right after this. I think he had an actual doctor that he had already established a rapport with in Washington, so that's important too. Most tellingly, neither of defendant's experts drew that or any similar inference. Neither expert offers any opinion on whether any of his conditions made it more or less likely that he was physically capable of committing the crimes charged. Thus, the expert opinions themselves are inadmissible during the guilt phase because they are not relevant to guilt. The defendant's attempt to stretch his experts' opinions beyond what they say is barred by Rule 403 as unfairly prejudicial, misleading to the jury, and a waste of time. Well, y'all are totally guilty of the exact same thing, so I guess y'all are just playing fair now. Finally, it now appears that the defendant wants to offer evidence that his OCD and ASD are actually physical conditions as opposed to mental conditions. As stated above, this is new, and the state is attempting to understand how this would be relevant or admissible. The state will note that not having this knowledge before, the state's motion in limine was not drafted to address it. Oh, so this is something else. Okay, so the defense is once again doing something that they blamed the state for doing, and they're doing it now. Based on the above, the state asked the court to enter orders in limine as follows: prohibiting the defendant from offering evidence of purported explanations of how he may appear in front of a jury. This is irrelevant and immaterial, is most likely to appeal to the sympathies of the jury, to mislead, and to cause confusion on the real issues in this case, which are whether or not the defendant is guilty of murder and burglary. Number 2, reserving ruling on whether the defendant is entitled to offer rebuttal evidence of his mental condition to the extent that it might offer an alternative explanation to any state's evidence about the defendant's suspicious, unusual, or otherwise odd physical or social behaviors. Deny the defendant's introduction of the newly disclosed evidence regarding physical condition, which was not previously disclosed nor proffered as rebuttal or response to state's guilt phase expert disclosure, and which on its face does not appear to be relevant or material. Okay, we're on the actual most updated information as of April the 4th of 2025. These documents came out just a handful of hours before I was able to continue recording this video. This is where we found out that Special Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Joshua D. Hurwitz is now going to be appearing as an attorney for the state in this matter. And he has already filed his first motion. This is the state's first supplemental request for discovery disclosure. To defendant Bryan Kohberger and counsel, please take notice that the undersigned, pursuant to Rule 16C of the Idaho Criminal Rules and Idaho Code 18207, request discovery and inspection of the information, data, and materials listed in the attached sealed Exhibit S-1. This is a continuing request pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 16J. While the first supplemental request applies to all of the defendant's expert witnesses, the specific basis for this request is that the defendant's disclosures of the reports of the forensic psychiatric evaluation by Dr. Eileen Ryan and neuropsychological evaluation by Dr. Rachel Orr appear to be incomplete. The reports do not appear to be accompanied by all the results and tests conducted as part of the examination, the facts and data for the opinions contained in the reports. As such, they do not afford the state a complete opportunity to consider the substance of such testimony and prepare for rebuttal through its own experts. Accordingly, the state requests that defendant immediately produce the underlying data, evaluation, and examination results as outlined in sealed Exhibit S-1. So again, just like they have been complaining this whole time that the state's discovery is empty, there's no opinions, there's no analysis, the reports are empty, there's no information, they're apparently turning in information that apparently falls under those exact same categories. So if we could just quit playing tit for tat and actually get it together, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay, we have finally caught up on all of the neuropsychological and psychiatric evaluation, autism disorder, DCD, OCD, all of that information. And where we are standing is that the state is claiming that they don't have enough information because what the defense has submitted is missing information, lacking information needed for a full picture, the same way that the defense has claimed the state has done when it comes to location data and the rest of the actual evidence. And it seems like they're just going back and forth with who can be the most annoying. I mean, let's be for real. That's what it feels like here. So the defense needs to get it together and they need to prove what they're claiming here. I know that it's not on the defense to prove that their client is innocent. It is on the state to prove that the client that the defense is defending is actually the guilty party. But let's be for real. Nothing works the way that it's supposed to. We all know that. So if there's a paper trail, a medical paper trail of pre-existing conditions that actually go back to childhood and do not disappear and continue on through adulthood up until the time of his arrest and into now, then those are all very, very important things, especially if it does have something to do with his physical abilities. Now, just because they're saying that, oh, he had poor handwriting and oh, he had trouble tying his shoes, that doesn't mean that that was stuff back at like kindergarten age, because remember, He couldn't handle a knife to fillet fish. He couldn't have regular social interactions with people. He couldn't look them in their eyes. They're completely strangers. He didn't know how to interact with them. And he was incapable of handling a blade in a way that he could fillet a fish. That matters. That's dexterity. That's having the inability to have the coordination needed in order to do something that's fairly simple and that millions across the planet can do really easily. But it wasn't something that came so natural for him. And he wasn't, again, in kindergarten. He was like 16 whenever that happened. So that was what, barely over 10 years before this situation? And he was in school the majority of time. So unless he was going through physical therapies and things like that that we don't know about, I don't see how it just naturally went away. But I guess we shall see. I just want the evidence. I just want the proof. I understand the argument, but I need to see the paper trail on both sides. Let me know how you guys are feeling about all of this down in the comments. If you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, please don't forget to leave a like on the way out. Subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. And please don't forget to make sure that that notification bell is set to all so you don't miss any of my rants, reviews, reactions, updates, or deep dives. See y'all.